All right, so thank you all for coming to this conversation. We have an amazing panel of experts in the room and a lot of knowledge here that we hope to share and then also engage in a dialogue with you all on thoughts and questions that you may have. This group here on stage as part of the International Justice Exchange took a trip to Germany. Prior to that, the International Justice Exchange went to Norway, really in an exploration of policies, practices, and the history that sort of comprises the criminal legal system and sort of all aspects of it. So my name is Brittany Lamar. I'm a 2L Evening Division JD student, also a researcher with the International Justice Exchange. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew next, and then he'll pass it along to the panelists, and we'll get right into it.
Brittany, it's good to see everybody here today, and I know there are some German law students in the audience. How many? Aha. And you're familiar with Baden-Württemberg, where we went to. Yes, right, okay. So we'll be speaking in similar terms. It was actually through a research partnership we have with the state of Connecticut and the state of Baden-Württemberg, in particular University of Tübingen and University of Freiburg, on human rights. It's a human rights research collaborative that a few of us are members of, that they afforded us the opportunity to go take a look at the justice system there. And so I'm Andrew Clark. I direct what's called the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy at UConn. We're located in the downtown Hartford branch, and we help to kind of convene these explorations and bring the work back here to Connecticut to do just this, have conversations and see if we can keep learning and moving the system forward as we progress. So I'd just like everybody to introduce themselves, and then we're going to start with some questions, but we really do want you to engage. And even if you have thoughts about things that are interpretations of the norms and standards that might be off per your understanding of it, this is a collective enterprise. So why don't we start with Tishun?
Good afternoon, late evening, everyone. My name is Tishun Bowden-Lewis, and I am the Chief Public Defender for the state of Connecticut, and I had the privilege of being able to go to Germany in June of this year with Andrew and people who are on this panel and others, so it was a wonderful opportunity. So thank you for having me.
Hello, guten Abend. I'm from Norway. My name is Per Våge, and I have been working in the judicial sector since 1984, when I finished my law school as a police employee, inclusive the local prosecutor role. For 6 years, I was a judge for 1 year, and I was then caught by the correctional service as a prison warden, prison governor, and then later as a regional director. And for those years, I was part of this reform we did with our organization in all manners. I'll come back to that later. But I'm glad to be here now as an international advisor.
I'm Pat Griffin. I'm Connecticut's Chief State's Attorney. So as such, I'm the Chief Prosecutor for the state of Connecticut. And I had an opportunity to go to Germany to observe firsthand the German legal system, particularly the German penal system. It was fascinating, and I look forward to sharing our experiences with you.
Well, my name is Alex Sarkov. I work with Andrew at the Institute for Municipal Regional Policy at UConn. I direct the Connecticut Sentencing Commission, a group of 23 members who come from very different places in the criminal justice system. We have as members the Chief State Attorney and the Chief Public Defender, as well as different commissioners and appointees from each caucus of the legislature and the governor. I am a graduate of this law school. I've also worked for the judicial branch and the legislature, and I had the pleasure of attending the trip to Germany this summer. Agree that it was quite fascinating, and I think we all learned a lot, and happy to be here.
What brought us here today and what brought us to this work, I'll just say it from my perspective, is I started working at the state legislature in 1999, And this was in Connecticut as well as across the country, the pinnacle of our mass incarceration experiment here. And our state was wrestling with, is this the trajectory we're going to be going on, or can we go in a different path? And essentially, we collectively adapted through legislation and administrative actions a framework by which we were looking to minimize our incarcerated population, which is the most expensive thing that we do in the state, and try to impact the individuals that are returning so that they're better off. The communities that are disproportionately impacted are better off, but still maintain or even increase public safety. And so as we were doing that, what do? Well, you critically think about how do you do things better. And what we naturally do in the U.S., as you guys know in the international community, is we look to the U.S. because we think we do things better. And so we started looking across the states. What's Ohio doing? What's Florida doing? What's the like? And so we did learn some things there. But as we were going through this journey, and just recently, during the beginning of the COVID years, through this experiment we've been going on, these reform efforts, Connecticut did lower its prison population from its max of 20,000 to roughly 10,000 now. Just so you have an understanding of that, the U.S., I think the average per 100,000 is roughly 400 to 500 per 100,000 incarcerated. Connecticut now is more like 230. But in Baden-Württemberg is similar to Norway. It was around 57 to 60 individuals that are incarcerated. So we still are in a higher level of incarceration to international standards. So as we were thinking about what more could we do, we just became aware of states that were going over to Germany in particular. And then over years, understanding Norway, because they were deemed the most radically humane prison system in the world. And as we started asking the questions, well, how can you be radically humane and have these great outcomes of a lower prison population, lower recidivism, greater public safety, we began to understand that human rights and human rights standards and the framework that you have in Europe in particular had a huge impact and has a huge impact, not just on how the systems are set up. And as we learned, a lot of it came from the experience of the Holocaust, but how those guide rails are in place to keep the system going in that particular direction. And so it's been fascinating for us to learn about these standards, not coming from the perspective of that's why we should be looking at the system. And so and in our time in Germany, one of the things that we were able to do is in the basement of the hotel we were staying at one evening, we just reflected on those standards and learning from each other in terms of what they were. And I wanted to kind of replicate that. I think we were thinking that was such a neat conversation that we were having and just bring more people into it. So we thought we'd lead with Per Våge, just talking about his experience in the Norwegian system and how the international human rights impacted that system, but also he's more recently an international advisor, so was in Ukraine before the war. He's been involved with Lithuania, Australia, and the like. So I'd like to start, Per, with you with some few thoughts.
Well, thank you. To say something about the legislation concerning human rights in Norway, we made an act in about 1975 called the Human Rights Act, which also then, you know, the hierarchy of the acts when you have the Constitution above the normal acts accepted, but above the Constitution, we decided that the human rights were above that. So all acts in Norway should be according to the international conventions accepted by the Norwegian Parliament. We should think that that was kind of easy peasy. When I studied law from 1979 till 84, we did not care too much about human rights in the law school. And then when I started as a prosecutor, we did not care much about the human rights standards or expectations until we had some court cases. I think that was made national, and it was brought to the Supreme Court, which then kind of made us in the prosecution we had to follow the human rights standards, not the Criminal Procedure Act of Norway. So that was my first shock, and I was kind of unprepared. Also meeting a judge who was then a former professor from university, and he asked me about these human rights norms. And I was kind of like a question mark in the courtroom. But I really had to hurry up to update myself on the human rights standards. That was kind of the first signal to me that this is real. When I then came into the prison system, and I was not actually impressed by the standard they treated people as individuals. We tried to move some stones inside of our own organization. But then we were visited by the CPT, which is the Committee for Torture and Inhuman Standards from the Human Rights. They are part of the court system in Strasbourg in the European system of human rights. They came to my prison in Bergen, which was like the gold standard in Europe at that time. And then they found many things they could point at, which was then we had to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, why didn't we find those mistakes ourselves? And we went to the DOC in Norway and had to discuss that with colleagues, which were kind of surprised just as I was. But we managed to balance on this line for a while. But CPT came back many times, and they were digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And they went into kind of the core elements of how to run a prison, like strip searches, like telephone listening procedures, like these solitary confinement procedures that we had in Norway. And many of them were kind of surprising to us, because we had this standard how to run a prison and how to cope with the inmates for a long, long time, and they came and said that this is not according to the human rights standards. So we have had large work now. It's not all of it is finished nowadays. For instance, solitary confinement, we are discussing how to make new acts in the parliament, how to change the laws into these fields. Other things like the telephone listening, we could change just the regulations, and it was easy for us to do it. But for the staff and the management, it was a great impact. The thing about this, to tell you these examples about daily life, is that human rights is not only about values and kind of inaccessible things. It's about practical, concrete elements in the daily life. So that's the first aspect.
One of the things I think that's fascinating that especially is poignant in this time is the idea of prisons is it's the catchment system for people who have done the most egregious things in society. And so the question of then layering human rights standards when there might be a propensity towards vengeance or retribution is, I think, a difficult thing for a society, for systems to wrestle with. And I guess one of the questions that you'd have with that is, okay, so they instituted those human rights standards, and you thought you were doing and you were the gold standard. Did that make you better in doing that job of creating the society safer, or did it make it more difficult?
Well, it's this reflection I get when you ask me that when you're running a prison within the justice sector, you expect from all your inmates that they have to follow the laws and the regulations set in a prison. but we also, as staff, have to follow and obey all the regulations. And for that mean the human standards, if they are beneficial in one way or other, it could be micro elements, that's good for the inmates to see that also the state has to follow a set of rules. And this kind of participation in the democratic state like ours is very important to those weaker parts of society.
And I think we'll go into the Connecticut landscape here. This is to any of the Connecticut folks. You know, what are the human rights standards here? Do we follow international standards? And if not, what were the things that maybe you reflected on based on your work back here that we might be able to bring back or think about, at least here?
Well, to answer, do we follow human rights standards? No. I mean, in all, I would say that there's a difference between theory and practice, and theoretically, we're supposed to be able to see that humanity and to give everyone, regardless of what may or may not have occurred, because we do know there are people who are incarcerated here in Connecticut who should not be. But regardless of whether or not you're deserving of a punishment or not, that you still need to have some sort of respect that's placed into what's happening with you. And I think for me personally, as I'm on the defense side, so clearly our clients are the ones who are accused of crimes and the ones who are incarcerated or detained preventatively. And one of the big things that I took from Germany was that respect was given to every person, child and adult, and it made a huge difference in their process of changing their mindset and rehabilitating them, in allowing them to grow and change from whatever happened to bring them into the system. And that is woefully lacking in many areas. I'm not going to generalize and say that every single jail or institution or every single person who works in those institutions is bad or wrong, but the majority of situations is not anything like we witnessed in Germany at all. Even with the children there in Germany that we saw, I can't remember the names of the places we saw, but like there was a free-form prison there for the children. There were no walls, there were no barriers. They were able to leave if they chose to, but they didn't. They chose to stay. And we asked them, why? You could just walk down the road and, go about yourself and do what you need to do. And they said because the people there, those who were in charge, they saw their humanity. They were respectful of them, and they had formed trust with them. And they knew that being there with those people who were dedicating their lives to assisting them to change their lives, that's what it was about. To me, that's the human rights element that is often lacking here in Connecticut and other states as well, too. The amount of training that was put forth for those who were working with those children, and even the adult prison we went to go see, we don't have anything compared to that. Years of training. So they understand it's not just about punitive measures and a penal institution. It's about rehabilitation and seeing the fact that people can change, especially our children. So we need more of that here in Connecticut. We need more humanity, even for someone who has committed the most egregious and violent crime, because you just don't know what kindness and respect can do to change someone at their core.
So,
I don't want you to say anything, Attorney Griffin. No, I don't.
she's giving me a hard look. So let me first start by saying, I'm not an expert on the workings of the prisons in the state of Connecticut, I've been the chief state's attorney for a year. I've been a prosecutor for 28 years. And one of the things that I've instituted in coming into this new position is a requirement that every new prosecutor, in fact, all prosecutors, But certainly every new prosecutor, as part of their introduction and training, has to visit a penal institution to get a sense of what goes on within the walls. But of course, that's an hour or 2 hour visit. You walk through the cafeteria, much like we did in Germany, right? You see the exercise yards, you talk to some guards, you talk to the warden. You get a sense, I guess, but there's a vast difference between visiting and living in that institution. What I would say is that what I took from my experience in Germany is that, unfortunately, the United States has an issue of violence that is unique in the Western world. And so we sit here in Hartford, Connecticut, a relatively small city by standards of the United States, but about 125,000 people, I would say. And last year alone, 138 individuals in this city were shot, non-fatally, but shot, and another 38 individuals were killed. Those numbers are staggering, and that doesn't count Bridgeport, and that doesn't count Waterbury, et cetera, across the state. So when I looked at the German facilities, the level of violence, unfortunately, that we see in Connecticut, and that's not even talking about places like Detroit or Atlanta or Chicago or Los Angeles. The level of violence, it's not an apple to an apple. It's like a apple to a basketball or something, right? So I could be wrong on my numbers on this, but my recollection in Germany was that there were 40 homicides in the entire country of Germany last year. And what's the population of Germany? Say it again? 80 million, right? And in Baden-Württemberg, did I get that close? There were 40 murders or 20 murders, right? And 10 million people roughly. And so I agree with Tashawn in the sense that the facilities were wonderful, right? They were gleaming. And the one thing that really struck me was the level of commitment that the German government, at the state level, I suppose, in rehabilitative services, right? So we were in a couple of facilities that would, small by our standards, that had better machine shops and woodworking facilities than anything that I've seen in the state of Connecticut. And so the effort to rehabilitate by providing sets of skills so that folks are not just warehoused for X number of years and then they get out, that they come out of their time in incarceration maybe better off than when they went in. I thought that was very impressive. And I agree, that there was a level of respect. We saw various facilities. The juvenile facilities really struck me. I think that we fail in Connecticut and across the country on many levels. You have a 14-year-old kid running around Hartford with a gun, and there's very little consequences in the juvenile system, and yet at 18, magically, that same kid now uses that gun, ends up in prison for 10 years. That's a failure. We saw a facility, it was a farm. I think there were 15 or 20 kids in this farm, and it was like a 12-acre farm. And I'll tell you what I thought, how many farms would we need here in Connecticut? So, the level of commitment to rehabilitation, I thought, was what stuck with me about the German experiment. But often I kept thinking to myself that this is not a direct comparison. It's very difficult to talk about Norway or to talk about Germany and then talk about a country of 370 million people and sort of generalize. We have a gun problem in this country, right? Gun problem that cannot be ignored.
I would say that Connecticut criminal law is not really framed in terms of human rights, international human rights. Although, if you look at some of the key concepts in our criminal law, like equal protection and due process, presumption of innocence, right? These are arguably human right concepts. And if you go back further, some of our founding documents, like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and even Declaration of Independence, arguably came from the Age of Enlightenment and human rights, international human rights ideas and ideals. Now, the systems are very different, and we often look at other states for evidence-based practices. It was very refreshing to take a look at a completely different system that in the end seems to get pretty good results in terms of recidivism and other metrics. I do think there are elements in that system that we could and should look at, including the pretrial justice system. I'll agree with Pat. To me, the most impressive thing about Germany and what I saw was just the massive investment in the infrastructure to make sure that people don't come back into the system, which is really the best thing we can do. And these are not just criminal justice investments in terms of residential beds for people with substance abuse issues and mental health issues, which are really needed, but everything around criminal justice systems, like the education system, healthcare system, housing, right, which is a huge issue. And really, that's the type of investment that it'll take over here to turn places like Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport around. I think violence and gun violence is an issue, but it's everything else around it that's we're really not tackling, right? And certainly the German system seemed much more humane, but I suspect that it's more humane because the society is more humane, if that makes sense. At least certain, there's less inequality, there's more social support and more investment into people.
Can I just follow up with that on the issue of gun violence? Gun violence to me is a symptom of a larger disease, right? No criminal justice system ever designed or developed can prosecute out of the violence that we see in this country presently, right? So gun violence is a symptom, but to follow up with Alex, what are the underlying causes of gun violence? Homelessness or lack of good housing, education systems that are not up to par in the inner cities, hopelessness, substance abuse, mental health issues. These are the driving factors that are consistent in each. You start in Maine on Route 95 and go all the way to Florida, right? And it's the largest unbroken urban development in the world. And each city and town that you go through all the way down to Florida is going to see, to a larger or smaller extent, the same issues. And so, in order to get, and this is a larger issue or a larger discussion, but I think Alex and I've had this discussion recently, and he used the term a Marshall Program for the United States to rebuild our inner cities, to rebuild our institutions. The problem I have as a prosecutor, once you've pulled that trigger and hurt somebody, you look at our pretrial detention numbers, 30% of our pretrial detainees in Connecticut, I pulled this out, I thought you guys might find this interesting, 30% of the folks detained are held on an assault ones, home invasions, murders, robbery one, or sexual assault in the first degree. I submit to you, anywhere in the civilized world, including Germany, those 5 categories would result in detention. The issue is you're not having the numbers in Germany, so if you had 40 murders, those 40 individuals presumably are going to be detained, right? So I guess my message is, and what I took from the German trip is that the United States has to do better looking at this as a holistic examination rather than just examination of the criminal justice system.
I just want. Oh, go ahead. Pear, go ahead. Go ahead, Pear. Go ahead.
What we did in the correctional service early 90s, we said that the task to fix these people or rehabilitate them is too big for our agency. We cannot do it alone. So we just had this statement that the municipalities have to support, the social service have to support, housing responsible agency have to support, and of course mental health is very important. And then when this has been built on, not only since 1990, but of course since the late 1950s in a country like us and Germany, we get 2 different cultures. But we can now, both of our European cultures, we can say that at least we include everyone in our societies. We don't exclude anyone, not even when they are in prison. Because prisons are also a social institution that belongs and is owned by the people.
Just very quickly, violence, crime, those kinds of things, it's understood. We here in the United States, in Connecticut, we understand the implications of those things. But for me, the intentionality that was placed into what happened in Germany that's what's the key. When a person, whether it's a child or it's an adult, once he, she, or they enters the system, what is being done intentionally to help them not return? And that is the fine line for me, because in Germany, months, years before the person is getting ready to leave, they are making those plans to help the person not return. Here, you get maybe about 6 weeks or so, and that's just not enough. Something as simple as food choice. If you were vegan in the German system, you can get a vegan meal. That's not happening here. And what does that say? I mean, this is something my choice as a person, and I understand, the person may have committed a crime, may not have, but they're in the institution. But something as basic as that, even medical care, true medical care for whatever it may be. We have some here, but it's not to the level that they have there in Germany. And what does that say about your humanity? Whether or not you did something wrong, what does that say to you as a person? No one cares that, are trying to help me, to help myself, to not come back here. Those are the things, whether it's an adult or a child, that need to be looked at. The intentionality of what happens once you are in there, and how you are treated, and how you are working together as a community to keep them from coming back. That goes back into the root causes of why we have violence and crimes and things that are going on, because not enough people care enough to do something and say something about the inequities that are happening, the systemic problems that are happening. Yes, in Connecticut especially, but also across the country in the U.S., there are systemic problems and issues that people are uncomfortable talking about, but they affect what happens within our institutions, and the amount of crime, the amount of things that are happening, the amount of arrests, and how we are really working towards trying to lower recidivism rates and increase quality of life. Or is that actually happening? That really is the question. Is that really happening? So just that.
All right, and then I'm going to sort of jump off something that you started to mention, and that what are we doing when somebody's incarcerated? And I think also a big piece of that is how long we incarcerate people for. And so when we look at sentencing and length of sentencing and an aging population inside our prisons, costs associated with that, and human rights overall, I just sort of want to bring the conversation, whether it be pretrial or sentencing, and sort of what the practices are abroad here, reflections on the sentencing and length of sentencing abroad, and here. And Chief State's Attorney Griffin, you mentioned the numbers and the violence being disparate, and so that also plays into it. But I think it's also an important conversation when we talk about rehabilitating, but then a huge portion of incarcerated people who may have been rehabilitated after a certain period of time, but may not ever have the opportunity to return home. So those sort of things. So I think first, Per, I'll turn to you. I know in Germany, the sort of life imprisonment is quoted at 15 years. And so, Per, if you want to speak to Norway, and then we'll just open it up to the panel. Again, it can go into pretrial detention or sentencing or crime rates, those sort of things, but very broadly with the, sort of remainder of our time, just put that out there.
I don't know where to start. We could start with the youth. We have this limit to to put criminal charges to people over 15 years. So, and also in the prison, it has been a big development just the last 10 years when the Ministry of Justice said, I don't want any children under 18 to be put in prison. And we rejected, and we said, with experience from prosecution and police, we said, oh no, Mr. Minister, this is not possible. We have to put someone in there. And then he said, I want to make new units for the youth. There should be just a few places. So in Norway now, we have 8 places for youth to be incarcerated. He said also that these units should not look like prisons, but more like homes. So we made 2 units in Norway so far, and we cope with it now after 10 years, approximately, to take, of course, most of those places are occupied, but what do we do with the other hundreds of criminal youth? Well, we use the mediation and restorative justice run by the probation service, and they make conditions for each individual person, and we collect the network around each person to kind of secure this boy or girl, because there are much more girls when they are younger than they are older. So we make some kind of security around each person, and it functions more or less okay for our system. The general public, they show a great support in our way of treating criminals, both the young ones but also older ones, and we now prosecute from the courts more than 50% of all criminals to the probation service and not to the prison service nowadays. So there has been a development, and we have taken chances, risks on behalf of from the legislators to make our system more liberal, you could say, but also based on trust, where the convicted persons who get a conviction in society, they take care of their way of executing this sentence, and not to run away, not to come up with a lot of breaches. The percentage of breaches in the probation service of ordinary criminal but minor criminal cases is only 7%. So the rest, the 93%, they execute the whole of their sentence in society. So, I mean, I have to be humble when Pat is talking about the situation in America. It's really, seen from our perspective in Europe, it's kind of strange that you have this level of serious crimes. And concerning the execution of those crimes, you have to do it the way that you say. We have to be strict on the worst ones, and maybe you have much more of those, but we can also discuss what experiences are there to achieve, looking at different countries and also reading the human rights standards to see whether we are aligned with that.
One of the rights I know is that the European Human Rights Charter of fundamental rights is fair trial principle. So to me, the fair trial principle. And to me, important for fair trial is that nobody should be intimidated to go to trial. But I heard that in the US, I think over 90% of cases end up being plea bargains. So they never really see a trial at the end. My question would be, how do we justify that? Since we have, what's the reason for the plea bargain system in general? I just don't generally understand it.
The plea bargain system is a complex issue that could probably, we could have a seminar on. But generally speaking, you're correct. It's well over 90% nationwide that criminal cases are pled out. And in Connecticut, that's certainly consistent. When we look at our violent crime in Connecticut, I also need to note that only about 2% of our cases end up at the high court level. 98% of the cases are fairly low-level misdemeanors, and they're at the lower end. And we have a wide range of pretrial diversionary programs that allows a defendant, should he or she choose, to avail themselves from everything from their first time arrested for DUI, driving under the influence, to attend a program of education and evaluation and get a dismissal, first-time domestic family violence education program, drug offenses, etc. On the why are plea bargains? A plea bargain is a bargain struck between both sides. Neither side, if the plea bargain is done properly, is happy. So for example, as a prosecutor, I may have what I believe to be a strong criminal case, a murder case, but I still have to put that case before a jury. I have reluctant witnesses. I may have difficulty finding witnesses. There may be mitigating factors. For example, the age of the defendant, a lack of a criminal history, and actually Tashawn and I have been in the room together doing this.
Many times,
Many
you all,
times.
many times, yes.
And so how does it work? You know, we sit down, not too far apart like we are now, and I'll give her my version of the facts, and she'll respond by telling me about her client, about any mitigating factors that she believes are relevant, that those mitigating factors run, correct me, from social, educational, factual, legal, right? Just plain mercy, right? Like saying, this guy, Pat. No, I mean,
No,
true or
no,
false. I mean, we've been
you're
in a
right.
room together, we say, Pat, this kid, I know what he alleged to have done, but he's not a bad kid, right?
Yes.
And so now, can we reach a bargain?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to be honest with you. In Connecticut, murder carries 60 years, maximum 25 minimum. So there's not a lot I can do on a murder except plea bargain to 25 or above. But maybe Tashawn convinces me that the kid didn't have the intent to commit the murder, and now I'm able to come down to manslaughter in the first degree, which is a lesser offense. So I get that plea bargain is a difficult concept, but often, many times, the benefit is to the defendant rather than the state, because I'm coming off a charge or I'm reducing. I mean, you're not pleading. There's no plea bargain to murder 55, 60. Right. There's no plea bargain.
Right, that's true.
Plea bargain would be, what can you do for me on this? You know, 25. Now, the ultimate decision to go to trial is not mine. It's the defendant's. I can't stop them from going to trial, right? If the person wants to plead not guilty and go to trial, we have a trial. But often the plea bargain is a way to try to reach an accommodation as opposed to federal system where there really is no plea bargaining. You know, you have statutory guidelines, and we can't as a federal prosecutor, because I'm cross-designated, or was, very little room. I get it that the plea bargaining process has a bad connotation, but you know, it's the way the system does work in Connecticut and in the United States, and nobody's ever happy. So if I come out of that room and Tashawn got me to man one, now I got to go meet with the victim's family who wants the death penalty, and I have to explain there is no death penalty in Connecticut, okay? So if a plea bargaining is done right, I guess in essence, neither side should be fully right.
No, I agree with that, but I do have one thing to add to that, though.
Go ahead.
Everything that Pat said, I do agree that it's a process, you know, bartering kind of a thing, but there's one other part of that, too, that many people don't want to realize or recognize, and it's a phenomenon called the trial tax. So let's just be clear, in Connecticut, the majority of people in the system are black and brown, okay? And so many our clients have a fear. They have a complete fear. If I don't take the 5 years that have been bartered and have been bargained, negotiated, or mitigated, however you want to say it, or the 10 years, then I know that if I end up going to trial and it doesn't go my way, because there's no guarantee, no one's a crystal ball, then I'm going to get smacked, meaning I'm going to get a large amount of time. So that inherent fear is a part of the process that many people don't want to recognize, and it's true. And we're actually trying to gather statistics on that now to show across the board in Connecticut that is real, that fear, that tax, and it does happen. Because systemically, again, too, yes, most people who are incarcerated here, who've been arrested here in our state, are black and brown, but most of the people who are in the system, whether they be the judges, the prosecutors, the public defenders, the private defense attorneys, are not. And so you go into a setting like that, inherently there is a fear in and of itself. And then, you pick a jury. If you go to trial, you pick a jury. Getting a jury of your peers, which is supposed to happen, is very difficult to happen here, at least in this state for sure. But we do it the best we can, you know what I mean? But those are the things, another component of that process of plea bargaining and why it's so high for many people in this state at least.
And Deshaun and I were pretty close on this. From my perspective, however, imagine you have a child sexual assault, and the offer is made in a plea bargain with the idea of keeping the child off the stand, not putting the child through the ordeal. And so a defendant takes that benefit of a lower offer and accepts responsibility. Rejects, now flip it around, the defendant doesn't accept responsibility, and has a right to a trial, but now the court is in a position to have heard the entire case, had an opportunity to listen to the evidence. And yes, I think in most instances, in fact, almost all the time, I can think of a couple of cases of my own where the pretrial offer was higher than what the judge gave at trial. And I just want you to think about that as well, that acceptance of responsibility in cases, particularly for me, child sex assaults or adult sex assaults, where the trauma of having to get up on the witness stand, if that person goes to trial, I do think the court takes that into account. So, but I agree with Deshaun. The sentences almost always are going to be higher after trial.
And just also put in that too, that people plead guilty or under the Alford doctrine, however you want to, or anything else, for different reasons. Not everybody who pleads guilty is actually guilty of either what the crime that they're being accused of is, or are guilty at all. There are many systemic pressures and reasons, as well as collateral consequences. You know what? I've been incarcerated now for 20 days. If I get an offer to, to do time, serve 20 days and leave, then you know what? I can go home to my family. I don't lose my job. I don't lose my home, my SSI benefits. There are many factors that go into people who actually plead and take an offer. It's not always because, you know what, I'm taking accountability and I did it. So just to put that in there too. But yes, obviously people who do plead for reasons that are, the appropriate things, but that happens as often too.
Just very briefly to follow up and to add to what Tashana is saying, plea bargaining process is very much related to the bail system, very much related to pretrial detention, right? In Connecticut, we don't have an ability to detain people without bond. And so whenever a bond is imposed, some people can afford to make it and they're released. Other people who cannot afford a bond stay in the jail until the disposition of their case. And you can imagine the tremendous pressure that people feel to take a plea bargaining agreement the longer they sit in jail, right? And so you do very often see time served type of sentences. And you do very often have people take these plea bargaining agreements that have longer consequences because now people have a record, whether it's a misdemeanor record, a felony record, and our pretrial detainment numbers are very high in Connecticut. It's nothing like Germany. About 35 to 40% of total incarcerated population in Connecticut actually presumed to be innocent. They're sitting in jail because they cannot afford their bond, just to give you the landscape of our pretrial detention release.
And please look up the Khalif Browder case. That's a perfect example of what happened. This young man in New York who was arrested for stealing a book bag. He was incarcerated for over a year. The bond was like $3,000. His family couldn't afford to post it. He was over a year. But he refused to actually accept the plea because he could have taken a plea and he would have gotten out of jail, but he said, I'm innocent, I'm not going to do that. And he spent years in the system. He was a child, he was 16 at the time, and the abuse, the situation, the solitary confinement, those things that happened to him, he was finally released after a couple of years, but because he didn't do it. He stuck to his guns and said, I'm not guilty, but it took its toll. Shortly after his release, he committed suicide. It's a classic case of how that plays out. So you can Google that, Khalif Browder.
So before we go to the last question, or we have one, and then we can also continue informally. But I did want to give a shout out because Lucas, I met not that long ago, and from Germany, as we noted earlier, and we had Hannah Bauer with us on the trip, who I think we all really appreciated, and I just want to put a shout out because a lot of these folks know Hannah. Some went to the same university, and we really appreciated her being involved, so I just want to say to any students that are interested in this, get in touch, and we'd love to see if there's a way that you guys can get involved too.
I think I've ever seen.
Well, she was moving back home after her year here, that's why.
That's true.
It's okay, we could do it a little longer. Yeah.
Looking at the way things work in the United States, especially with the systemic issues that we have, is that what I'm curious about is that how these systems work in a place where we have a lot of judgment that goes into people before they're committed of crimes, of pre-assuming that because you're from a certain neighborhood or you have a certain skin color or you're from a certain socioeconomic class, we're going to over-police those neighborhoods, there's higher arrest rates, there's concentrated disadvantage, all this stuff. So automatically people that are ending up in the system are doing it based on sort of a predisposition to assume that certain types of people, which are easily identified in our society by their skin color, are going to be more predisposed to commit crimes. And then once you are out of the system, it's really hard to get a job. I mean, even if you can be successful during prison, you can make the connections, you can do, get a college degree, whatever it is, you're gonna have that conviction following you everywhere. And in our society, it's very hard to get over that, to get to a point where you can actually be successful outside of prison. So what I'm curious about is compared to Norway and Germany, do they have that same level of challenges in making a rehabilitation of people successful to allow them to re-enter society in an easier way than I think a lot of the obstacles that we have here? And
I'll do short answer, no. Those collateral consequences don't exist. And Per can speak on it, but your criminal record is not made public. That's not something that employers are utilizing when looking for employment. I think aside from a couple positions, which is like police working with children and the military, right, as which they can require some sort of asking about those things. But no, I mean, the connection to housing happens during incarceration, whereas here, around 70% of people don't have a place to go when they're leaving prison and are dropped off on the side of the road. And then you don't have landlords that want to rent to people. Then you have a higher concentration of people living in a very small neighborhood who, it just sort of exasperates the issues that already exist in communities and sort of just continues like the cycle. But yeah, no, I don't know if you want to add, Per, but there's sort of none of it exists. And
Not even the conviction, too. I mean, it's not just an arrest. You wouldn't know who's been arrested. It's not public. It's not the crime is, but the individual behind it is not made public.
Yeah. I think it's, at least in the university, we can speak about principles. And the principle, one of them is that the only actor in a society of ours who could punish inhabitant is the state. So this plea bargain is not a matter of discussion in Norway. I mean, as an individual, if I had done something very bad, I couldn't argue and discuss that matter with the prosecutor. So the other thing which we had this morning meeting the probation service is also that I was aware of that everyone who are arrested not everyone, but many people are then released and nothing happens. But then many people are under the probation service with some kind of conditions. And that's something else we don't have in Norway. So either you're free or you're in prison. So we have these fixed principles. And that's also a matter which we can pick out from the human rights standards. It's either or. It's not so much to discuss. It's not up to the individuals to discuss this with the states, because yeah. So I've had some I've had some experiences, but I think it's important that we have to be humble with your situation, because it's much worse than many countries. It's also important that we discuss these experiences across nations. And
that's why we go, right?
Yeah.
Here we go. Here we go.
I say to people, if you want to have an impact on the criminal justice system, come join us.
Come join us.
I got
Yes. Us. The defense.
You can join the defense. You can join the defense. But I'm going to tell you right now, you want to affect people's lives?
Yes. Yes, and we do. You all, we can talk about this off camera. Yes, we do. Public defenders, yes.
What percentage of the criminal cases do the public defenders handle in Connecticut?
I don't have the exact figures for you right now. I know you have it. Go ahead and tell us, what is it?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's not 100%.
Well, of course not.
Right.
Of course not.
And so, and I always speak well of the public defenders in Connecticut. I really do. We have a system in Connecticut that you can be proud of. There's a statewide public defender service. They're true professionals. And regardless of what attracts you to service in the criminal justice system, there's room. I don't denigrate the public defenders. They have an important job to do. But so does the prosecutors. And I don't make excuses for the fact that prosecutors, North Star should be fairness, and their North Star should be public safety. And I think that, that's why I went. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to exchange ideas. So,
You know what, I'll just wrap it up because, we can't obviously cover everything in an hour. Okay, one more. Here we go. Go ahead, throw it out.
Well, I just want to press on the idea that the North Star should be public safety. Shouldn't the North Star be justice?
well, yeah, I mean, as I indicated, fairness and justice, right? But when we make determinations on pretrial determinations, when we make recommendations on sentence, of course, I urge you to take a look at our prosecutorial standards, which were the first adopted in Connecticut this year, and they lay out the standards of what an ethical prosecution is. First, the prosecutor has to believe in good faith that he or she can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. First, okay? So if we can't get there, then we're not talking about it. Close to 50%, 50, all criminal cases in the state of Connecticut are nollied by prosecutors. And I believe that is a good, 50.
I didn't know. I'm sorry, they are what?
Nolly. You guys familiar with Nolly? Nolly prosequing, it means that they choose not to pursue the case. Within 13 months, there'll be a statutory dismissal. I'm proud of that statistic because I think it shows that prosecutors are taking their oaths very serious. They're evaluating the facts and circumstances of each case. They're weighing whether or not it's necessary even to bring the charge forward. And besides the Nolly, when you see a Nolly, it also doesn't tell you what we did. We call it prosecutorial diversion. Tashawn may have a client who's probably not, but an operator suspended. No, I don't mean that.
Wait a minute now. No, I know.
You probably wouldn't have this case, but an operating or suspension.
Yeah.
You would come to me and say, Pat, can you give me 30 days to get his license? At the end of that 30 days, I will enter a Nolly. Why? Because if we give that person a conviction, that person will lose the very license that they just got back. So, yeah, the North Star is always doing what's right, but also public safety. We have to always keep that in mind and when we make our recommendations, whether that's on sentencing or on bond. And it's a very difficult line as you look at the type of cases that we see. I think we've done a really good job over the last few years collectively reducing the number of folks held on nonviolent offenses at pretrial. The days, I think, it's less and less to see somebody held for 30 days on a larceny 6 and then given them a time served. There was a time when that was very...
That was the norm.
I don't think that is the norm today. I can tell you that, you know, my standing direction to the prosecutors are, you know, we're like a MASH unit, right? You've got, in Hartford, 104 pending murder cases on the Part A docket. Okay, we got to focus on those cases if you're a Part A prosecutor, and the larceny 6s and nonviolent crimes have to take a back seat to that. So.
Well, thank you. And one of the things, too, I just want to end with, from my perspective, is in all of the trips that we've taken, we recognize the role that the U.S. plays on the international stage. And that is very true about what we're exporting as well as what we're importing. So it just put the imperative more in my mind on making sure that we do things right here, because it has an outsized influence on, you know, what other countries and potentially other systems are going to. I want to give one last plug to Alex, because not only will we a few of us stay and have some conversations for those of you that want it, but there's going to be a whole room full of folks here tomorrow all day for a symposium that the Sentencing Commission is putting on.
So it's an all-day symposium tomorrow in this room, 8:30 to 5, and it's focused on criminal justice issues in the context of mental health system, so the intersection between mental health system and the criminal justice system. And Professor, good to see you. I had you for compliance back in the day. So.
And it was also my pleasure.